Aloha, everyone. Pretty good, pretty good. Okay. Before we get started, I want to thank two sponsors for this track, the Better Business Bureau, thank you very much, and Zion's Bank. I really appreciate it. Woo! There's also a follow-up event to this tonight at 4:15 at the rooftop. It is a mentorship speed dating session, so hope to see you all there as well. All right, so before we get started, in the spirit of Entrepreneur Week, let's involve everyone in this session. So, we're not at a sporting event or anything like that, but entrepreneurship and business is exciting. Like, I am super excited about my company. I'm super excited about this event and everything that Boise's doing. So in that part, you are all important to this session. So please feel free to cheer when you hear something that you agree with, that strikes you in a positive way. So for example, somebody on our panel says something like, it's really important to engage with your customer base to get market feedback. All right, there we go. Good. Thank you very much. All right. My name is Aloha, and welcome to Boise Entrepreneur Week. This is Success Stories series. The session is Go to Market. My name is Nic Kawaguchi. I'm the co-founder and COO of Vessel. Derik is my business partner. There you go. I'm from Hawaii, so I had to add a little bit of Aloha spirit into this and everything. And I'll be moderating this panel. The purpose of this panel is to provide you with examples of go-to-market strategies and tactics that have worked, which talented entrepreneurs here on stage have had experience with. You will be able to relate to the stories and will even probably start to develop your own ideas for businesses or products that you're currently working on. We want you to all be successful in your endeavors. We're all in this together. And the Boise culture of entrepreneurship, technology, and support really elevates us all. So to begin, we're going to discuss what go-to-market is and its importance. This will be followed by our panel discussion. I'll also introduce the panelists, obviously. And we'll also have about 10 minutes we'll have a Q&A session afterwards where you guys can ask questions. So please have your questions ready, just kind of in your head as we're going on. So to start, let's introduce our panelists. We have Derik Ellis, co-founder and CEO of Vessel. We have Cheryl Adams, a CFO at Amplio. Did I get that right? And Kim Reeves, co-founder and CEO of Legacy. Thank you. All great friends. To get to know our panelists a little bit more, I have a question that I wanted to ask, and I will say this up front. I stole this from my wife earlier in the week. So for my panelists, when did you first show symptoms of being an entrepreneur? Kim, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so I started out my corporate career in bank marketing, and I was kind of one of the first people to help create the initial CRMs. That's how old I am. And as I created that, and other states liked it, they wanted me to replicate and go, create it in other states. And then I got recruited by another bank, and they said, create that for us too. And by the time that matured, I realized I had basically created my own business within a business, and that gave me confidence to do it. So when I left the corporate world, I thought I'm gonna do my own thing, and I thought if I'm gonna do this and be an entrepreneur, which it was my first time doing it, I'm gonna do something I love. And I had been doing stained glass and leaded glass architectural for doors and windows as a hobby. So I turned it into a business. Went to Northern California because I got a lot of money and a lot of architecture there. Started in a little one-room studio apartment, like sleeping on the floor. And within 10 years, we were the premier provider. So that's what kind of grew. That's how
Awesome.
It grew.
Thank you so much. That's a great story. Derik?
Two things came together for me. Growing up, very young, it was hard for me in school, very dyslexic, found that out later. And while I was in school, I would solve problems without being able to solve the problem in front of people. And so it just come to me really easily. But in parallel, my mom had started some beauty salons and then a beauty college, and they became very successful. So I started mirroring what she was doing. I knew she had learning disabilities as well, but she was wildly successful. So I would say it was the influence of my mom and embracing the disabilities that I had. And eventually that became even more powerful for me.
Thanks, Derik.
So I'm very similar to Derik. I would think that my parents, my dad started his own business at the age of 16. My mom started her own business at the age of 21. So I grew up in a household full of entrepreneurs that I think my parents, until I went away to college, they had probably started and sold 7 or 8 companies that I had, like, after school, going and working and staying up late nights and unpackaging and going to Vegas to look at the new products. So it all started very young. And I think, in my career, right out of college, I was an internal auditor for a large manufacturing company, and I was the credit analyst, and that was just too boring for me. I love numbers, but sitting in an office just staring at them all day. So they turned me into, and I spent about 7 years opening up plants all over the United States. I would go train the accounting staff, the office staff, manufacturing, set up manufacturing lines. And that's when I kind of just knew that being more in that entrepreneur and just starting and opening up and training and mentoring was really my path.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I'm really looking forward to hearing your stories. So to begin, let's start with a little more context. We have a quick video that we'd like to show that will give us a quick landscape of what go-to-market is and why it's important.
You're an entrepreneur and you see how to solve somebody's problem through a product. First thing you need to do is develop your go-to-market strategy. This is a plan that details how an organization can engage with customers to convince them to buy their product or service and to gain a competitive advantage. Your go-to-market strategy includes tactics related to pricing, sales and channels, the buying journey, new product or service launches, product rebranding, or product introduction to a new market. Typically, there are 5 guiding principles to pursue for the right go-to-market approach: positioning, messaging, timing, endorsements, and execution. Positioning, and probably the most important, means identifying what your product is and who it's for. Many companies, especially early stage, want to do too many things for too many audiences. They want to solve everybody's problems. Their positioning turns into a long-winded narrative rather than a razor-sharp message. This also creates fatigue within your organization and funding sources. As a result, the customer isn't sure how the product relates to them. The solution is straightforward. Talk to real-world prospects to get your positioning right. Try and sell it to them. What's their pain point? How does your product fix it better? How much does it matter to them? Which customer types are willing to pay for it? You need to define your winning product differentiation from your customer's point of view. Next is messaging. Not to be confused with positioning, messaging refers to the words you use to describe your product and its value. It increases your efficiency, lowers your costs, it aligns you with that customer more effectively. Messaging can be used in many ways, from advertising to scripting for sales. Next is timing, and timing is very important. Every once in a while, the positioning is so tight and timing so right, the lightning can strike. Think about Uber and Airbnb. Both tapped into this sharing economy. Think about local companies like Count and PlexTrack. They've also tapped into this as well. Next is endorsements, or trust and credibility. You can build marketing campaigns and sales approaches, but if the market doesn't trust you, you're going to have a hard time getting into the market. So how do you build that trust? Next in line is how you execute on your planning. Execution is very important. A focused, methodical execution is critical and completely specific to your product, to your customer, and to the market. Keep in mind that the industry you're in will dictate your go-to-market approach, the type of customer you're working with, and their purchasing criteria, whether it's an end user or you're selling into a group, or you're selling through a wholesaler, a distribution channel, or you're licensing.
Thank you guys again for attending. Really appreciate it. Let's move on to our panel discussion for this topic. Each of our panelists here have taken products and their services to market and have implemented go-to-market strategies. I'm really looking forward to the stories that you guys are going to be sharing about your go-to-market efforts and how you were involved in these. Cheryl, let's start with you.
So I've got several different. It was hard to kind of, I guess, take one because I've helped organizations not just come up with ideas, but really help take it and launch it. I would say that one of the biggest things that comes and sticks to mind is, always making sure that when you are looking at any type of compliance or anything, I think one of the things is, one of the organizations that I worked with was in the airline industry, and they had spent hours and hours and thousands of dollars on engineering resources to design the product, but it would never meet compliance and would never be able to be put into an airplane at all. So they had to start completely from scratch. They spent 3 years. So compliance is really, really important, I think. Also, is looking at, we all have great ideas, but how can you financially, making sure that you can financially take it to market, and you've got the team that's going to help launch you to that. I worked with Jewel Case, and a lot of people probably know Jewel Case, and they're a great success story here in Boise. And when they first originally went into the market, they were going to be, the large events, and then COVID happened, and they had to immediately pivot into, okay, what are we going to do? We're a brand new startup. We have all this product. We have all this product on order. We don't know. So we kind of got together as a team and said, what happens if we do a small portable that in the house? Everybody wanted to live off the grid. Everybody was concerned. People were, wanting to be. You had to all be excluded in homes or out and about. So that really was, they were agile. Within 45 days, they were able to then hit the market and completely pivot. So I think with that type of organization, that's really, really important. Another one, I remember there was a gentleman. It's really kind of he was an entrepreneurial from a very young age, and his mother had invented the fake fingernail. So him and his mom had come up with all these business ideas. And it was funny, that interesting story, how she was going to a wedding, and she had she built these plastic things and glued them onto her fingers. And then she ended up selling that off for millions of dollars. But when we were helping to design and manufacture the idea, they really didn't look at what is the competition in the market and who is their ideal customer base for that, and how are they going to then get it funded. They built this huge product that was a pill dispensing, which a few of you guys have seen it, even in the audience. And they didn't realize that the people who they were thinking was the target market actually wouldn't put something like that on their countertop. So I think, really looking at, some of the start to finish, like Derik was saying, I think is really, really important. And making sure that too is you strategically look at the direction, and always constantly, cash flow is king. You have to make sure that you can fund it. And there's lots of really fun, creative ways in which you can fund startup organizations.
Great, thank you very much. It's really good to hear it from a more of a financial kind of perspective and regulatory. It's interesting. Derik.
All right, this is for success stories, but I'm going to hit you with some horror stories real quick.
It's a reality.
Serial entrepreneur here, and it's messy. And I've done it the bootstrapped way. So that just means self-funded. Back in 2008, it was a little cleaner. I started a software company with Dave Romero. He started Black Sage Technology here. And we created that company bootstrapped. And essentially, we did custom software development, and we'd take our profits and we were developing our own products. And these products were sort of reverse engineering how Google looked at authority on the search engines and interesting competitive stuff. But that's for another story. And that went really well. And Dave and I carried that company through. We, did a lot of great projects, and then the company ended. We split ways. We're still great friends. Years later, after some consulting, Nic and I went into business together. Same approach. So start with consulting, and we would consult with small to medium-sized manufacturers, and we'd serve them with products and services to help them grow their manufacturing companies or put them in better positions. Well, we've all talked about 2019, and this is where the horror story comes in. So leading up to 2019, we'd grown the company in a multitude of directions, serving the same market. We were building technology. We were taking lots more risk than most people would feel comfortable. We'd never, ever borrowed money from an investor. And of course, March of 2019, things changed rapidly. A lot of our business was agency type business. And so we had to kill the 3 other opportunities we were exploring, focus back into the business. And we looked at a team of people and we said, listen, our runway just went from 6 months to 2. All the risk we were taking backfired. So what do we do? Where do we go with this? Are we all willing to take sacrifices? The key was to be fully transparent with everybody. I promise this is a go-to-market story. So we said to people, if you want to go somewhere else, we'll help you go somewhere else. If you want to stay here, here's the sacrifice that we're going to make to stay here. And that sacrifice was to shift into a completely different business model. And so, a lot of the team left. Some of the team stayed. And the team that stayed, man, we went through the gauntlet together. It was rough. The next 6 months was spent getting on the UN's sales lists, selling healthcare products into NASA, into hospitals, and we did it. And we learned a lot of lessons that was not our customer base. But it was a survival method that a bootstrap company would do. So it's imperfect. It wasn't even a pivot. It was just like, over here, we're going to do this. And we had days where we were bringing in crazy amounts of money. And we had days where that money went right back out the door because we weren't qualified to understand what we were doing. But it bridged us to where we were getting back to our old customer base, the small to medium-sized manufacturing companies. So we survived that. We saw distributors starting to come back online. We could recognize that, and we said, okay, let's go back to our customer base, but what new tools and learning did we achieve through this cycle? What was the investment that we earned? And it was to expand on our supply chain consulting business. We connected a lot of dots. And so at the beginning of 2021, yes, we shifted, rebranded, and we went out to our old customer base, and it started expanding. And then we started expanding into centers of influence around that customer base. And now we're going to expand back into technology. So we'll be launching software. But that's sort of a bootstrap story, if you will. Yeah.
Thanks, Derik. But I mean, really, the point that you're getting at is that we really understood our customer. We went back to the basics.
Yep.
We knew how we were going to market. I mean, that was the key.
But it was imperfect.
Absolutely.
Yep. And you had to duck and weave and figure out how to survive. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks. I remember all of it. Yeah. Okay. Kim?
All right. Hi. So Legacy is located here in Boise. We're an innovation company focused on pressure, temperature, and flow. We invent simple mechanical solutions for our clients to become new best practices for them, but also scale to other industries and other applications. So while our focus is very narrow in pressure, temperature, and flow, the applications are virtually infinite. Medical, hospitality, farming, you name it. Okay, so go to market. A big part of go-to-market is data analytics, right? Well, I'm not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Say, for us, I'm going to talk about relationships, because at the end of the day, for us, it's all about relationships. So specifically about creating win-wins. Now, what is that? We try to create wins for everybody that's involved in a project. In fact, if we can't find a win for someone other than financial, they probably shouldn't be involved. So I'm going to share with you what it looks like, how we create wins, what it looks like. And there's 3 different types. There's a direct win, there's a peripheral, and then there's a totally random one, okay? So a direct win, a couple years ago, Molson Coors came to us, and they said the Atlanta Braves are building a brand new ballpark, and Molson Coors is sponsoring over 300 seats in all of right field. And they wanted us to figure out how we can keep people's beer from getting warm on a hot summer day. You've had that experience, right? Your beer gets down to this much and it's warm, and you either toss it or you chug it because you just spent $12 for it, right? So what if that last bit was colder and more refreshing than your first sip? right? That sells a lot of beer, by the way. So we invented these cup holders and drink rails that now are in stadiums across the country, and they do just that. So Molson Coors decided to launch this at their annual distributor conference. It's a multi-day, multi-media event, right? Big deal. So my partner, Jeff Dalton, and I are there setting up, and Pete Coors walks over and says, hey, Kim, give me the 90 seconds on this. So the 90 seconds I gave him was not about legacy and our technology. It was about what our technology does for Molson Coors and the stadiums and their fans, right? So he goes away, comes back about 20 minutes later, waves me over, I go over, and he has someone with him this time, and we do the whole thing again, right? Then about an hour later, he comes back, and he's got a whole bunch of people with him. So I start walking over, and he's like, no, like, I got this, and I'm like, okay, good, you know? And I can still hear him talking, though. And guess what words are coming out of his mouth? Mine. My 90-second, right? And a bunch of other stuff. But how much more credibility in that room are those words coming out of his mouth and not mine, right? This is his innovation. This is their win, right? We're the inventors, but it's their win. And how much more buy-in is there from everybody in that room because it came from him? Do you get that win? Okay, so now here we are at the Atlanta Braves, opening day, everything's installed. First time the colder drink rails have been in public, right? And they're getting a surprising amount of attention, especially from the media. And ESPN wanted to interview us. And we said, well, yeah, we're the inventors, but it's a Molson Coors innovation. And I said, see that guy over there? He's the head of the whole Southeast US for Molson Coors. You want to talk to him because that's your story. He's going to give you a lot better story, a win for the reporter, right? A lot better story than we give you, right? And how much more can I leverage that versus the story he was going to write? So you get that? Oh, and by the way, you guys know the Idaho Manufacturer Alliance? They're having a competition right now for the coolest thing made in Idaho. I don't know if you've seen it, but our colder cup holders are one of the 13 finalists. And voting ends today, so vote accordingly. Okay? So that was an example of a direct win. Does that make sense? You say it's easy to see, right? Okay, so a peripheral win, the pandemic hit, and you heard about the huge shortage of ventilators, right? Well, we also had a pressure regulator that we invented for draft beer systems, and we realized we could take that and create a handheld breathing device that would be perfect for pandemic situations when you needed a whole bunch of ventilators real cheap, real fast, and also for like mass casualty events. It doesn't exist right now. Well, we invented that, and we got a SBIR Phase 1 contract with the U.S. Air Force for injured warfighters. So now we're working with them on that, and while we're working with these folks in San Antonio, because that's where the medical military kind of cross-section is in San Antonio, they heard about our colder drink rails, well, from us. And they said, hey, the number one need right now in frontline battlefield medicine is getting whole blood to the front line. Can your device also warm? And we said, absolutely. So now we have a working prototype we call Thermodrone that's carried by a drone, and it's basically a mobile blood bank that keeps blood at the perfect 38 degrees, which coincidentally, no accident that beer is served at 38 degrees. That's our temperature. But while it's flying, it's time to start warming the blood so that when it lands, it's the perfect temperature, 101 degrees for transfusion. So people that are bleeding out get blood right away. We have a working prototype for that. So you get the direct wins for this, right? We've taken beer devices and made them into medical, right? But I mean, we went from saving the world one beer at a time, and now we can actually start saving lives, basically. But here's the peripheral win. In working with these folks in San Antonio, like you guys all know medical people, and they are amazing people. And you know military people, and they are amazing people. But people who are military, medical, these are badass people. They can pull a bullet in you, and then they can take it out. I mean, that's amazing. So we're in there in this meeting, and there's this one guy who's a level 1 trauma surgeon, and a very high ranking in the military. We really wanted him to be involved in the project. And he's like really cocky, which I think you have to be to have that role. But he's like, I don't know, this project sounds like a lot of work, you know. I don't know if I'm gonna have time. And we said, hey, you have to write papers and publish as part of your job, right? He says, yeah. I said, how'd you like to publish on these technologies? You'd be the first one on this brand new technology, first one on the planet to put it out there. And he goes, now that's interesting. And he was in. So how much more engaged is he in the project? Yeah? How much more motivated is he to have the project be successful? Have it test and be successful for the military, right? So I think, this is my opinion, I think that the whole world of marketing can be boiled down to just 5 words. What's in it for me? Right? And that's a good example of it. We had to find what's in it for him. And if you can live on that side of the fence with people you're talking to, the wins are going to be obvious. So that's kind of a peripheral win. So I have one more example, and this is a totally random win, okay? So we're located over on Grove. I don't know, where am I pointing? Am I pointing in the right direction? Over on Grove. We're right across from Big City Coffee. So there's us, then the liquor store, and then Second Chance. Are you guys familiar with Second Chance? They like take donated building supplies and stuff and they sell it, and they're a nonprofit. Okay, good. So we have a relationship with Second Chance in that they lend us their forklift now and then, so we don't have to buy one. And then we give them a monthly donation. It's a great win-win, right? So that's the stage. So one day our bookkeeper comes to us and she says, hey, my husband plays on an old man softball team, and we're wondering if Legacy would sponsor the uniforms, the shirts and the hats, put your name on it and pay for it. And I said, well, first, what's an old man softball team? It's basically a bunch of 55 plus guys, a lot of veterans, maybe athletes back in the day, and they play in tournament in the league around here in Treasure Valley and play in a lot of tournaments. And I said, okay. So I said, how much are you talking about? $1,000. And I said, okay, well, what's the win? And she goes, they get uniforms. I said, well, what's the win for Legacy? What's in it for me, right? She said, marketing, advertising. And I was like, well, not really our market. We're more B2B, or B2B2B, in fact. But let me think about it. So my business partner, Jeff, who's a brilliant strategist, many of you know him, he said, what if the name on the shirts, on the uniforms isn't Legacy, but what if it's Second Chance? What a great name for an old man softball team. Right? So we put together a plan, went to Second Chance, said, that monthly donation we do with you, how about if we just multiply that, like really explode that? And then they said, tell me. So we said, okay, what if you guys, what if we take some of that money that we donate, pay for these uniforms, you get advertising for a couple years, and it's the market of all these. He says, that's our market. These old guys that puddle around and all their friends, that's totally our market. And then we said, and also each player and the coach on the team has committed to gathering 2 pickup truck loads of stuff that they unclutter from their family and friends that they will donate to Second Chance. And they said, fantastic. So then their parent company, Ship, liked the idea so much that they said, we want to do the logos and design the shirts so that they can control the messaging, right? So they did that for free, and it all worked out. So how much did Legacy spend to do this? We were already spending that money, but look at how many of the wins it created, right? The bookkeeper is a hero to her husband. The husband's a hero to the team. The team has the best uniforms in the league, right? Second Chance now has people who never heard of him before hearing about him for the next couple years, and they're getting tens of thousands of donations that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise, and we spent nothing to do it. So it's a good example of a random win. And they just played in a tournament. And if you go into Second Chance and see the bulletin board, there's a big photo of the team in their fancy uniforms holding a trophy. Guess what place the Second Chance softball team came in? Second. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's an example of a totally random win. So I would encourage you to look for these wins, not just for your clients or your customers, but also for your employees, also for your suppliers, for your investors, or just random in the community. 1, it's ridiculously fun to do it. 2, it not only builds relationships, but it cements them. And 3, you'll make money doing it. So give it a try.
Woo! Thanks, Kim. That was great. So you see how exciting business is. It really is. How exciting startups are, and the energy that's created. Appreciate all of you guys' energy. This is really good. In conclusion, really, a go-to-market strategy is pertinent. There are many different methodologies, like we saw in the video, but really they all have. Every methodology has the fundamental kind of the same steps. You have to go through the same steps to really do it. Everything is unique. It depends on product, depends on service, depends on industry. And in my experience, they should also, as Derik mentioned, they should not be carved in stone. You start going down a path and you have to change. I mean, there are going to be little changes, pivots, whatever they may be. It's extremely rare that you'll hit the bullseye on the first time. So anyway, thank you guys so much for your stories. That was wonderful. we'd like to open it up for questions. I think we're kind of running early, so I think we're all right now. So who's got some questions for the panel? Okay. Well, I just like to think that we did such a good job that everybody's like, yep, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to run with it and we're going to make a successful product or service, right?
Okay, so what do you think about hybrid business models and how do you manage those?
Yeah, the question was, what do you think about hybrid business models and how do you manage those? Do you guys need an example? Or?
Yeah.
Could you give us maybe an example of what you're thinking?
So, like selling to both businesses that are leaders in the industry and to consumers.
Selling to both businesses in the industry as well as consumers.
I'll give you some, maybe a little bit of feedback with that. I think that if you have the right brand message, the messaging, like Derik was saying, is really important because sometimes your messaging to a B2B is not going to be the same to the end consumer in the market. So if you can get the right wording and messaging, I think it's great. Hybrid models, typically you can have different margins in those products. So that also helps. And diversity as far as any shift in the economy, that also being able to have two different revenue sources and business models going into play is also really helpful. But I would make sure that the messaging is right because sometimes your messaging to one won't always be the same to the other. And you'll end up spinning and you won't end up going down. You won't be able to service both of them unless you've kind of thought through because your target and how you service them might be different. So kind of strategically go through both sides and what does that mean? And then how do you blend it together? But I've worked with several companies that have both models and are very successful.
This may not answer directly, but I want to talk about vision visualization and then vision alignment internally. So, if you're thinking about hybrid models or you're thinking about your business, it's critical that everybody internally shares the same feeling, thought process, the same spirit of what you're trying to achieve. And then I think that when you're aligned in that way, hybrid models are possible because you're aligning with the customer, you're aligning with the products being aligned with the customer, the team on every level is being aligned with the customer, and so you can sort of divert your efforts in that way. That may not be a direct answer, but yeah.
Cool. Anybody else?
Any specific tips on go-to-market with service versus product, and then on the B2B2C approach?
For us, it's service then product. That's the way we've approached things. So we get in, we try and understand the customer very in depth, and that builds the case for us to start bringing products to market. So that customer validation, learning, and then we start with the products when we start finding underserved things or mysteries that we're starting to solve that feel common over time. And then it just kind of depends on the market, B2B, B2C, which we typically focus on B2B. So that's as far as I'll go on that.
I would say for us, there's not really a difference. Our product and our service are intrinsically linked together. And in fact, one thing to consider is a lot of people think that customer discovery is a phase of your product. It's something you do in the beginning. We don't. It's a lifestyle. You do it all the time. Even after installation, keep it going because you know what? That's how you find the wins. That's how you find the needs. And that's how you get repeat business from the same person. There's a lot more that they want to buy from you. They just don't know it yet. But if you're constantly in customer discovery and finding the wins, then so that sales are easy. It's not even sales. It's just making sure they win.
Yeah, we typically call that customer as the influencer.
That's very fancy.
Yeah.
And I think one thing too is, it's easier and less expensive to go with a service perspective than a product at the beginning. And then you can also pre-sell. So if you have kind of a service component and a product, you can pre-sell up front and front load it with the service and then be able to buy the product on the back end. So sometimes it is helpful to be able to look at, where the funds are flowing through from that, that aspect.
Sorry, did you have a question, Karen? Yeah. Okay.
So when you're talking about the execution of your product or your go-to-market, and you also mentioned cash flow is king and having enough money, what advice do you give to entrepreneurs about how to predict how long adoption will take? I mean, you're new to the market, you're coming out there, you've got to figure out how you're going to live before all the sales come in.
I'll speak to our focus. We call it pre-sales positioning, and that means you spend most of your time figuring out how to sell, locking sales down, communicating with that customer, and that starts building some predictability.
I'd say for us, we try not to be in development on too many things at one time. Create something, get it out there, commercialize it, make money, and then that pays the everyday bills, and then you can either use the profits from that to do your next innovation, get investors, go after grants, contracts, something like that.
Yeah, I agree with Kim. I think that another way to kind of look at it a little bit too is there's a way in which that you can bring in an advisory board. I always recommend organizations to bring in, because you don't always need that particular consultant as a full-time. You can bring them in, give them a little bit of equity, and you're not out a bunch, but they're transitionally. So you can constantly always evolve an advisory board. And so coming into to a development, you can get some sweat equity, get their expertise to help you determine, okay, what does that runway look like? And so that I always think is sometimes really helpful to be able to do that at a low cost and understand exactly what it's going to take.
And of course, there are programs, as you know, that can help entrepreneurs with funding and labor and things that may not divert them at the time, so they can focus. Yeah.
My question was so as far as getting the product out there and not keeping it in development, like you said, for too long and just trying to get it out there. For example, right now I have this ebook type magazine thing to get the first part of the customer stage. We were talking about customer journey earlier, and it's just sitting in my laptop because I keep rereading it, re-editing it, rereading it, re-editing it. So how do you feel about just F it and just because I'm really struggling on that,
Well, I would network, and that may be a good place to start, is meet some people who have already done this and been successful, have them look at it, have them read it, and then introduce them to other people. And along that, you'll get confident to do it. But know also that you're not going to achieve perfection. You got to roll this out to the best of your ability, get it out there, and then on your next one, you'll start to make it better. But I think in that stage, we've been in that stage too. When we switched to medical, we were beer. I mean, we didn't know anything about medical, We went to Karen Applegren, and Zion's Bank was super instrumental in introducing us to all the people that we needed to know. At the universities, that's another place. Go to the universities. They offer free help on all kinds of stuff. BSU and ISU and all the other SUs. That's a great place to go. There are people who want to help and that are experts in these. So go to them and ask for help. Does that make sense?
I would say iteration is really important. As you're learning about your customers, they're going to teach you so much more if you put it out not quite complete. There's an interesting variant that we see with founders. When you have a very technical founder versus a founder that is great at the market, for instance. So technical founders typically start digging themselves back into feature sets or perfection, and it becomes cyclical. And then a lot of the creative market founders that we come across, they start digging into multiple markets. And so this becomes sort of a pattern that we see. We encourage people to take a little more risk and pull that back a little bit and start iterating with the customers so that you have that learning. And then the next version is even better.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to make them a part of the build for sure.
Set a date.
Set a date.
Set a date.
Yeah.
Set a date.
That's Jake Blanchard, by the way.
Jake Blanchard, folks.
Expert in logistics. Works with Vessel. Works with Legacy.
Any other questions?
Maybe this was talked about earlier and I missed it, but how do you protect your idea? Like before.
Well, it depends. I guess I'm more familiar with physical protecting rather than intellectual. I mean, like written, like copyrights on books or things. I'm more familiar with product. First, you want to meet a good patent attorney. If you guys need one, I have an amazing patent attorney. He's international and he's just done wonders for us. But that would be the first thing, is to consult with them. Or there are other resources that you can go to that are free to find out, based on what your product is, what you need to do to protect it. And then once you want to file your patent on it or whatever the right approach is for what you're creating. And then here's an idea of if somebody's out there infringing on your patent and they're getting successful, you don't want to shut them down. The first thing you want to do is say, hey, let's work together because they're successful. They found a way to do this, right? So work with them. And if you can't work with them, then you got to take steps to shut them down. But does that help?
I have a little different perspective. I agree with Kim, but I'm going to come from a little bit different angle. Sometimes, I've recommended to clients to be able to look at is what is the product and how long is it going to take you to get to market? Because getting to market is, like Jake said, so much about timing. If you go through with IP sometimes and attorneys and all the upfront costs, it's going to sometimes take you twice as long. If it's easy to get, if it's easy to replicate, does it really make a difference if you have something patented or not? If it's a 2 to 3 year cycle and you're going to have to turn and develop it again, sometimes it's not worth spending that money and the time. It's more important to get the first iteration to the market, generate revenue, and then later, because if you turn around and redevelop it, it's not going to match the patent sometimes anyways, and you're going to have to redo it and recertify it. So really look at both sides of the angle. Is it really, timing is so important.
Yeah, you'll want to ask yourself if it's more worthwhile to build the customer base and build that value perspective rather than protect something that you don't know if it's going to result in something in the market, right?
Anyone else?
Yeah, timing's
Just
everything.
quick question. I was curious, what lens do you use or pattern process do you use in analyzing whether a product or service would be something you'd be wanting to take to the market?
Well, I would suggest not making something and just hope it sells, because you don't know, right? It's a gamble. I would first figure out, if you have an idea, figure out who your customer would be. And then go to them and design something that's specifically for them, and then ask them to pay development costs and place the first order. That's actually our business model. One of our business models is because we had really a lot of early success as an innovation company with Apple and Marriott and ITW and a bunch of other Fortune 150 companies. And that's when we decided to really narrow to pressure, temperature, and flow. And the 5 criteria we put in to take on any one project is: 1, it had to fall within our lane of pressure, temperature, and flow. If it's outside that, we don't want to, spread our resources too thin. The second one, it had to have a customer with deep pockets, willing to pay the development costs and also place that first order. Then it had to not only meet the needs of that customer, but also others horizontally like them. And then 4th, it had to scale to other industries and applications. And 5, we had to own the IP. So that's how we targeted everything. But just creating something that you think might sell and then putting all that effort and money into it and hoping it sells, that puts you in a corner. But if you do all the research front, find your customer, then you probably don't have to pay all those initial costs. You can get them to help pay the development costs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what she was talking about earlier, how they're looking for compliance, before going for compliance.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too because so a lot of my background is in medical device, and it's really interesting. So these large Philips, GE, and a lot of these Bayer, what they used to do is the engineers would design an idea, and then they would spend millions of dollars developing it, getting to FDA and patenting it, and then they would take it to market and hope it sells. Now it's completely shifted. They're not doing that anymore. They're going to the end consumer and saying, what do you want? And we'll develop it based around that. And they're no longer like, sales reps, the digital marketing is so much more important. And so that's really, you're seeing the shift a lot to what does the end consumer want, because they have more of a voice now. And, even hospitals and stuff, doctors have more of a voice. We want this. The patients have more, even in the health sector, which typically you didn't see that before. So the market is definitely shifting to that is consumer centric.
Any other questions?
Our favorite question is, what do you need it to do?
Anybody else?
Just a quick one. Thank you so much for being here today. Just to follow up to that, in terms of funding the development.
Oh, thank you. Much better. In terms of funding the development of a new idea or something and retaining the IP, how do you balance that with customers who say, well, we're funding the development, the IP is ours? Is that something you've encountered?
Yeah, we have. If they insist on owning the IP, it's just not a good fit for us, But what we found is our customers, we encourage them to stay in their lane and we'll stay in ours, if that makes sense. Like Molson Coors, they just want to sell beer. They don't want to own the IP. And if we own the IP, then we can continue to innovate it and develop. If we share the IP, then we're kind of handcuffed in how it gets developed. So typically we just pass if someone is super insistent, but usually we'll try to find what the wins are for them in the relationship outside of owning IP, and then that can tilt the conversation and have the project move forward. Does that make sense?
I have a kind of a funny story around that a little bit. Is we had at the incubator, we had a gentleman came in. He had developed an air purification for potato storage, and he wanted to know, how we could put part of the UI and kind of change it and make it a little bit more diverse and a little bit user friendly, because it was this big clunky piece of machinery. And we ended up going into a dual partnership with him and ended up using it in medical surgical rooms. So we used the same technology, completely different. We were not a competitor of his because we were not in the market. We helped him to get to market because we did do an agreement and we did partner together on IP. He used it, we used it, and then he was able to actually, get to market faster because we paid for part of it.
Well, and also really, really make sure it's something new, because we get a lot of ideas, a lot of inventions that come to us, and they exist. So, spend some time doing that research too. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't bring that product to market or a variation of, if you have a better way of bringing it to market and be competitive.
Right. Also consider that sometimes the resistance around that is just because that's the way it's always been done. Like my mom used to cut the end off a ham when she would cook it for Christmas, and I never could figure out why. And she said it's a tradition in our family. My mother did it, her mother did it. I asked my grandmother one day why she started doing that. She said that it wouldn't fit in the pan. So we had that situation with BSU. We wanted to hire some of their professors and students to work with us on some of our innovation, but they were limited to reduce to practice with the current legal documents that they had to work with, or we had to have them be unpaid. They just didn't have a good variety of agreements to work with. So we worked with our attorney to come up with a new consulting agreement that paid them for their work, for their time, allowed them to get college credit, allowed them to work behind the curtain with us on actually innovating to where their students, professors could actually be on a patent. Can you imagine being on a patent when you graduate, right? And we still own the IP. And all it was just creating a new legal document. And we got it through their BSU's risk management and BSU's legal. And now it's a working document. So sometimes you just have to think about, is this just because it's the way it's always been done? Or is there some other reason?
Kim, how many patents do you guys have?
Oh, we have 4 utility patents in the medical space now. But we have dozens of patents. Actually, we have almost 10 patents in the U.S. now total, and we have dozens internationally in all the same technologies. Yeah.
This is great, guys. Thank you very much for the questions. Anybody else? Okay, well, maybe we can wrap up just a couple minutes early then, I guess. You guys will have time to get to the next sessions. Again, thank you very much to Zions Bank for sponsoring, as well as the Better Business Bureau for sponsoring the track. And we have the event tonight at 4:15 as well on the rooftop. Hope to see you guys there. Thank you.
Thank you for all the great questions.
Thank you.